many, many people have asked for a very, very, very long time about an Abathur guide. Abathur, I believe, is my second or third most played hero. He can do a lot, and I've refrained from doing one because it's less emphasis on the build and more on how you play the character, which is very difficult. And I can't really say, well, just do this and do it every game, because it's never the same. It's like playing chess versus a new opponent because the map is different, the opponents are different. So what we'll do is we'll talk about the build. I'll talk about some of the tips after on things that you should absolutely do as an Abathur. And then some maps, I'll just recap the maps on which ones you shouldn't play, like Braxis. Don't be that guy. All right, so for Abathur, you have to look at him, and I think that we got to set the stage for how you have to look at Abathur. Abathur is a supplementary piece to a team composition who is very good after level 10 with Clone, because that is the only talent you should pick. Unless it's quick match, and then you do whatever you want. But we need to think about it like this, is that Abathur is very much a team-oriented hero. He can heal off of his Q, or off of his Q within the symbiote, off his carapace. He heals and he shields off of it. Your W can have multi-pronged approach, and your E in that situation, or excuse me, your Q is your stab, your W is your shield, or your E is your shield, and your W is your spike burst. I'm looking at him here and it's throwing me off. So your spike burst really strong, your stab really strong, and your shield, which is your E key actually, heals and shields for a short period of time. So you have to look at it like that. So for a long time, reinforced carapace was the one. This used to heal. It used to do some different things, and it's still okay. But the real power comes with the level 1 talent. Now, these are the only two that you should consider. I really dislike Envenom Nest. Why? Because it doesn't impact the team fight. When you play Abathur, most of your impact is in a team fight. Yes, for all you people that are like, but macro wins the games. Yeah, it's just kind of like picking Lava Wave. It sucks, and it doesn't really do as much as you think that it does, and most of the time it's a bad choice. Except this is far worse of a situation compared to Lava Wave. So imagine this being worse than Lava Wave by picking Nest and doing different things. I don't like this. Pressurized Glance is the pick. Increase the range of Symbiote Spike Burst by 25%, decrease its cooldown by 1 second. Now, there is a time and a place for Reinforced Carapace. It's just really hard to go into the situations when and where I like it, because this is my plan B, where my number 1 is this. This gives me a lot of range on this, which really helps. The cooldown reduction on this is really nice. You go from a couple of seconds, you shave off a second. It's actually a huge cooldown reduction when you consider the math on it. So it helps out a lot in that regard. Pressurized Glance is 95% pick rate for me, with Reinforced Carapace being the other 5%. And if I'm absolutely trolling and playing quick match, I'm picking Envenom Nest or Survival Instincts. I'm never picking Survival Instincts. I am never picking Envenom Nest. This is like 1 in 1,000. This is 5 out of 100. This is 95 out of 100, okay? Don't pick this, ever. It's really, really bad. I can't even begin to explain to you how bad it is. Level 4. You have 2 phenomenal choices here. 2 of these are amazing, okay? The number 1 pick that you can never go wrong with is Needle Spine. Increase the damage and range of Symbiote Stab. Stab does a lot of damage, and considering the short cooldown on this, this is actually very powerful. It is a skill shot that you have to aim while being on top of somebody else, so you might not always get the position, but because it's on such a short cooldown, this is a tremendous amount of damage, and that extra range can be the difference between poking and getting a kill versus not getting a kill. So there's a lot of things to really like about Needle Spine. So the question is, when do you pick Adrenal Overload? Because everybody knows this is the pick that you pick with Illidan or Greymane or Zul'jin, or do you? And you just let them go ham. So Adrenal Overload means that you are committing to a team fight far more often. Needle Spine gives you burst damage, okay? So burst damage can be much better than sustained damage. If my team is blowing up a comp and they're already doing sustained damage, do I want to add more sustained damage, or do I want to add a little bit of burst into my life? And the answer probably is you want to add a little bit more burst into your life. That extra 20% that you're getting on the stab, and you get 2 stabs out, and you consider 25% attack speed, which is going to be marginal over DPS time. Over the long term, this will be better. Over the short term, the stab is going to be stronger. Adrenal Overload, Greymane. Right now with the Diablo auto attack build, having a Diablo is really OP. Skullcracker Murden, really OP. Or just Murden in general. Somebody that's going to benefit off of this, just living on top of people, because if you're not going Skullcracker, you're going Give Them the Axes Murden. Heroes like that are very unassuming, but they can be really good. Kharazim is a little tricky because he has really fast attack speed already. So are you going to get even more? There's a point of diminishing returns, like a Tracer. There's a point of diminishing returns, although a good Tracer Abathur combo is really good. But Greymane, Zul'jin, I don't really care to put it on Zul'jin. Yeah, he's going to get more auto attacks out, but is that really going to be my priority target in a fight, which, depending on my composition, might not actually be very good? So I would say pick Needle Spine probably 60% to 75% of the time, with Adrenal Overload being more of your niche situations on knowing who you're going to hat and why you're going to hat them. As opposed to you have a Raynor and a Kael'thas. Sure, we might like the Raynor auto there, but it might be better just go Needle Spine and hat somebody on the front line. But you might also have to cycle hats, which we'll talk about at the end as well. Level 7, probably 95% of the time you should go Mule. There are certain maps and certain situations where I think that you can pass on Mule. Network Carapace works really well. It shields all nearby allied heroes, minions, and mercenaries. So this is really tricky on when to pick this. One, it can do really well at pushing a lane, which means that if you can put mines down and then hat one of those targets, you shield everything, and then you hit your W because you increased range at level 1, and then all of a sudden that wave is dead, or you save your shield and allow them to push in. That shield doesn't last indefinitely, but it's still really strong. With this also, I recently played with a team that had a heavy dive composition that was an Illidan, a Greymane, a tank, and I don't know, maybe a Kharazim. Network Carapace sounds pretty good to me when you have that many people that are going to be going in and receiving a pretty big shield, which we can't show on this. Receiving a pretty big shield, I think that's pretty good. This is an untalented Carapace, so don't think that it pairs with the level 1, because then that would be really broken. But still, having a pretty decent shield amount on a heavy dive team, you worry less about the macro and you worry more about the team fights. This comes in about 5% of the time. I don't think you should really look at this too much. Mule is pretty much always, you can never really go wrong with Mule. And if you're on Sky Temple and you don't go Mule, that's 100% pick rate, then you're definitely trolling. So keep that in mind for ones that emphasize push. Alterac Valley, Garden of Terror, or Alterac Pass, I should say. Things like that are really good Mule maps because it can help thwart a very large push later in the game or in the middle of the game. Level 10, Ultimate Evo. I want to talk about this a little bit because I played Abathur on stream the other day. So if you want to actually learn how to play Abathur instead of just understanding the build, I play Abathur a lot. I love Abathur. And there's a lot you can learn by just watching Abathur play as opposed to being told, because you could talk about it for hours. Ultimate Evo, you get a clone for 20 seconds. You get 20% spell power, 20% bonus attack damage, and 10% bonus movement speed. So where does this come in? Jaina is the old tried and true Greymane. These are two very old school ones. Heroes not to clone. Zul'jin, Varian. Heroes that have stacks baseline that aren't very good. Heroes that are very unassuming that you should be cloning when you think that you should be cloning somebody else. Let's say I have this composition of Raynor, a mage, let's say Kael'thas is also a good one, but let's say we've got like a Mephisto, we've got a Raynor, and we've got any standard tank like Johanna, and let's say I have a Rhaegar. Rhaegar is very unassuming. He is actually one of the best clone targets in the game because he has really short cooldown reductions, and he does a lot of damage for a healer. And you consider that two of his abilities, because they're on such short cooldowns, your chain heal, 20% spell power, OP. Your lightning shield, get in there and get in the fight. Your butt bite that you're using with your Z, you can get multiple of those off. You should get at least 2 rotations off on this. When you consider that chain heal, I believe, is 8 seconds, and this is up for 20, you get 2 rotations of this as long as you're staying alive, which should be the priority focus. If you have 2 healers in a fight instantly, and one of those healers can put down a totem for a slow, and they can put a lightning shield down, get multiple bites out, which is a very short cooldown as well. We're looking at a lot of damage and a lot of healing very quickly. So you have to kind of look and think about these types of things and what do I get the bonuses out of? The tried and true ones of hatting an Illidan, but cloning an Illidan doesn't always seem good. Do I have an Anubrak on my team? We all know how much it sucks to be double stunned by an Anubrak with Burrow Charge and Impale. What if I clone the Anubrak and now all of a sudden you're stunned 4 times and I follow the other Anubrak and I stun the same target? That's pretty ridiculous. So you have to consider all of the options, and it kind of forces you to think about that. You should be thinking about these things before the game ever starts. Level 13, there's only one here. Now, as much as I praise the burst damage of Stab at level 4 and the amount of damage it does, Soma Transference is one of the biggest reasons why Abathur functions as well as he does. This doesn't sound like a lot, but healing for 64 health per enemy hero hit. This is a small percentile, but if you consider that you went into the cooldown reduction at level 1, this 13 looks a lot better because you're getting more healing throughput. You can now cycle this and get multiple ones out. You stay on top of people. You have a lot of damage. There's a lot of positives that come from Soma Transference and not a lot of positives from the other ones. Do I want to keep my team alive, or do I want to try and get an extra charge and a half-second cooldown? Half-second cooldown is probably not going to be a difference maker as opposed to staying alive in a fight. And if this doesn't sound like a lot, of course this is going to scale, but this is really good when you consider that if I hit 3 people at level, let's say this is level 1, where it'd be like 65, 66. Let's say I hit 3 people. That'd be about 185 healing to 190 healing. If I hit 3 people. And if I have a Vala who has 1400 health, or if I have an Illidan or somebody around the 15 to 1700 health range, that's 10% free healing on a very short cooldown. Sounds much better when you put it like that. Soma Transference 100% every time. 16. Now, there was only 2 picks at this tier for a very long time, and then they buffed Volatile Mutation. I still think this is 3rd on the list, but we need to take a look at the 2 really good ones. When do you need speed versus when do you need to slow the enemy team? Am I the aggressor? Am I the defender? If I am the defender, and I know that I'm going to be hatting more of my priority targets that are ranged assassins, like a Zul'jin, like a Raynor, somebody that is susceptible to dive that I know I'm going to be cycling hat-ons, and I'll talk about cycling hats in a second. That 40% movement speed can be the difference between them kiting out of skill shots, kiting away from a diving hero like a Maiev, and it can be really strong. And we're talking about a 40% movement speed buff for 3.5 seconds. This is really, really strong. And it also pairs well, of course, with the 20 that we'll talk about in a second, because now all of a sudden we're going to double the amount of people that get the movement speed. This is really good defensively. It can also be very good offensively. If I have heroes that don't necessarily have engagement tools, which most melee heroes do have engagement tools, then I don't worry as much about getting movement speed because they should have buttons to get there. What really works is the opposite effect. Abathur's Symbiote Spike Burst also slows enemy movement speed by 40%. So I can speed one of my heroes up by 40%, or I can slow an entire group of people by 40%. Therefore, I am the aggressor, but also the defender in this situation, which is what makes Envenom Spike so good. This is probably an 80% pick rate to 90% pick rate in my opinion. Some people will just tell you it's 100% pick rate. I think that there's definitely situations where Adrenaline Boost does come in. So these are things that you have to kind of balance when you're deciding what your hero choice is going to be, or what your composition is like and what the enemy team's composition is like. You can never go wrong with Envenom Spikes. You can go wrong with Adrenaline Boost. Now, Volatile Mutation, this clone's, let's say the clone, does a little bit of damage nearby, which is actually like Burning Rage, and it's a really strong one. But it's every 3 seconds and when they die, which means that if you were to total that, you got to be near somebody, so you got to have a hero that this makes sense on. Enemy heroes heal the clone or monstrosity for 100%. We'll just say clone for 100% of the damage dealt. This means that you have a very sticky hero that can stay on top of people, which is where Envenom Spikes also comes into play. And so you can stick onto it. So if you have a hero that is sticky or moderately sticky, slow is really good. Volatile Mutation, very rare, and you kind of have to balance this because it is every 3 seconds, which means that you're trying to live on top of somebody to try and spew goo at them. I have no idea what this is. But either way, I I'd say 80% pick rate for Envenom Spikes, very high. You can never go wrong with it. It is always good. Where Adrenaline Boost might be the better choice, but a very rare circumstance, and is generally reserved for protecting the backline. Level 20, Evolutionary Link was something they buffed last year or 2 years ago as well. I don't remember, but Hive Mind still remains as one of the best talents in the game, hands down. You want to win a fight late game, and you've been building. Remember, as I said before, Abathur clone, or Abathur is a combat style hero through hats and clones. As much as he can do macro, he can do infinitely more. And if you've ever played Heroes of the Storm, think about your team losing a level 20 fight. Your macro now doesn't mean a thing, because if your team dies in a fight, the enemy team walks past all that macro you have and walks directly to your core. Unless you've got Mule, which hopefully you've somehow managed to salvage all of your goodies by then. But Hive Mind, all this is now Symbiote creates an additional symbiote on a nearby allied hero. So this can be put on a minion nearby and then clone over. I believe that's correct. But either way, you put it on a hero, you've got another hero there. Post 20, your team should be together. So this is going to allow you to hat all the stuff that we've talked about with the cooldown reduction is still there. So now you have 2 people with hats. You have huge spike burst, which means more damage, which means more needle spine. So you can treat these like magic missiles from Li Ming, to where you're angling them at one target. Makes it super cool. Soma transference to keep multiple people alive. Your shield is keeping multiple people alive. And if their whole team is somewhat grouped around 2 heroes, 40% slow on an entire team is pretty nutty. When you can hit 2 to 3 targets and they're slowed by 40%, this is pretty OP. When you keep it with the cooldown reduction here, things are looking really good. Hive Mind, ridiculously strong. Now, with this build in mind, we have to talk a little bit about how Abathur functions and some key things that you definitely should be doing as Abathur. Okay? If you die 1 time a game, you're probably not very good. If you die on average once every 3 to 4 games, you're starting to get it. If you die once every 10 games, now we're doing okay. Ever since they made it to where Abathur can't soak XP in a bush, made Abathur's life much more difficult, because normally you could hide in a bush and somebody would have to look at the timer, because you have 15 seconds on your locust, and they would have to look at that and see where the locust was and whether that locust just spawned from that bush or not, or they could visibly see it. So how can we prevent this? First and foremost, one thing that we have to know. Now, for a lot of people, I don't know why this is, but it seems to be low plat and below. They went in, they hacked their files, and they disabled their minimap. I don't know how they did it, but it's true. So you have to be able to provide information for them as much as possible. And Abathur does that more than anybody. At high ranks, you can definitely help communicate to your team, and that gives information for them to be able to act off of. And that's really OP. Information is one of the biggest things you can give in this game, not only for your team, but for yourself. One of the things that I like to do when I look at Abathur is that if I'm going to be body soaking, I don't necessarily want to just throw 3 mines down, which work really well when you put them right around the wizard and the backline and you just explode on everybody. So what you can do in that situation is you need to preserve your mines for vision and information. The more information you have, the easier the game is. So if I'm an Abathur and I'm body soaking, I would love to fast clear this lane and put my mines down. But I also want to make sure that I prioritize every angle that somebody can come down and gank me from. Globals can be very difficult, and there's a lot of tricks there. Again, you'd have to play against a Dahaka and not stand near a bush. You have to play versus certain heroes differently. And that does come with just experience. But general notes, if I'm body soaking, I want, let's say it's Garden of Terror, very common for Abathur. Cursed Hollow, very common for Abathur. I want to be on the opposite side of the map, pushing a lane that nobody can gank while the objective is going on a clear other side. Now, I do want to make sure that nobody comes up. So every avenue, if I'm in the top middle, there's an avenue coming straight up on Cursed Hollow. I don't want to put it in that bush so much as I want to put it in that choke, because it's impossible to now go around it through that choke. Now, if it's top and we're looking on the right side of the map, there's also that path right in front of boss. I want to put it in that choke so that if somebody walks up to it, it's impossible for them to miss it. And lastly, I want to protect my backside if I don't have vision, which if you don't have vision, what's really going on? Garden of Terror. There's multiple avenues, but you can't go straight up the middle. I want to hit those choke points in every way so that I have 5 to 10 seconds to react before anybody comes to get me. That could be me just Z'ing out, which is done in a handful of seconds, but if I don't have those extra 3 to 4 seconds, I'm a dead slug. If I do have those 3 to 5 seconds, I can determine, do I need, because one, you're dismounting them. That you don't have to worry about the slow at level 1 or any of that stuff. Or at level 4, I don't need to worry about that, whatever the slow is, because it's bad. I don't know what it is because it's bad. I've dismounted them. I've reduced their speed. If you consider mount speed at 35, 40%, whatever it is, and I dismount them, I have reduced their movement speed by 35, 40%, whatever movement speed is. I have reduced their movement speed naturally with one mine. Now they can't get to me. I have reduced their speed by 40%. Or whatever the math technically is, from 140 to 100, 30%, whatever it is, 130%. I've reduced their movement speed by 30% by dismounting them, which means that now they can't get to me and they're slowed down, and I now have them coming at me at less speed. So you have to think about it in those terms. So every choke, I want to cover those before I ever put my body out in a risky position. Against the Falstad, that's on you to keep an eye on the minimap. That's the only hero that can naturally fly up to you and get to you without some type of notification. Everybody else, you should be able to see them through mines. You should be able to see them on the minimap as a result, and you should have time to respond. If you're playing against the Falstad, it means you have to look at your minimap that much more. You should never be ganked, ever. If you do, maybe you had a lapse in judgment. But if it's 1 to 2 times per game, you're not doing good. I've got news for you. If you're dying 1 time per game, 2 times per game, you are playing Abathur poorly. Okay, because you're not focusing on healing in the team, you're not focusing on hitting in the team, and you're definitely not paying attention to the minimap, and maybe you uninstalled yours too. So these are all things that you should do when doing that. Now, I mentioned earlier, the one thing you have to remember with your shield, let's go into try mode so I can show this real quick. The one thing you have to remember with your shield is that I want to... So this is on a 6-second cooldown, 6-second, and 3 seconds. This heals for 156 at level 1, which is a pretty significant margin when you consider that his health is right around 1600. So it's basically exactly 10% or just under 10% of Malfurion's life. So he gets a shield for 10% and he heals for 23 per second while the shield is active. So if the shield goes down, he's not healing, but you can see the 23 tick on here. So if this is 6 seconds, this is the reason why. When I say cycle hats, this is very important. If you run into a situation where your healer's not very good or you're playing with an Uther, now all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, I need to heal a little bit more. So if I consider that if I shield, I now have 6 seconds until I can shield again. This is pretty important to understand the very basics of Abathur. But if I shield unhat, this is a 4-second cooldown, which means that I now have less than 6 seconds of a hat cycle. So I can go through. Now, sure, like I would love that, right? But if I cancel immediately, this cooldown starts. And so that's less than 6 seconds, which is why there are certain people that don't understand math, and you'll see people rage. Just keep the hat on me. And in certain situations, you should be keeping the hat on them. But if your job is to cycle and make sure that they heal, this is how you cycle heal them. So make sure to cycle those hats, do different things, because the odds of the shield lasting forever is not good. So hat cycling is a real thing. The same thing as if I went here and then I had another teammate and then he needed healing. So I would go here. Apparently it doesn't let me hat this guy, but it would be the difference between me hatting another hero and then going and hatting another hero and then hatting another hero. It's much more efficient to hat cycle. So that is something that you should get used to, on knowing when to hat cycle and when to use those in rotations. You can also use that to put the shield on them and then hit E. This is like if they're not in combat or they're rotating. I put the shield on them, I hit E, I cancel, I put some mines down real quickly in 1 to 2 seconds because your APM should be okay. and then you go back and you hat them again. Like, there's nothing wrong with that hat cycling. There's so many different uses of hat cycling. It's kind of hard to get into all of them. If you're hatting a healer in the middle of a fight for the sake of healing, and you're not hatting a tank or somebody that's going to benefit more off of it, you're probably trolling. There's so much to get into beyond this, but mining for information on bosses, if you're on Sky Temple and it's later in the game, keep a mine on the boss. That way your team is not bamboozled by fog, and you can see when they're there. Put a hat on their camp so you know when they started the camp, or put a mine on the camp so you know when they've started the camp. There's so many different ways to utilize vision other than wave clear. Yeah, sure, the wave clear is going to look nice, but providing information to your team and to yourself to make sure you don't get ganked. You should set yourself up for protection first if you plan on body soaking in the lane, and then mine other places, not the other way around. Because if you die, your team is now 4v5 with 0 help, and you do a lot in the fight. That is 100% your fault, and you should always be active and available. You should never just sit there and hat one minion for 30 seconds at a time. If you're doing that, you're also bad. I'd love to get into more of these tips, but I think a lot of these are going to be reserved for stream. So I love to play Abathur. I play Abathur all the time, but this is the build that you should consider. When it comes to maps, the bigger the map, the better it is for Abathur. The more you have an objective that pushes a lane, the better. Not Tomb of the Spider Queen because it's small, but maps that you can keep alive after a push goes in. Battlefield, bad. Infernal, iffy. Garden of Terror, good. Sky Temple, good. There are rare situations where back in the day when the healing was much more beneficial that you could technically run a no healer Abathur comp. That requires very high skill level, and since we're not speaking to that audience, I don't think that's something I'm going to worry about. Use your Z. It's on a 30-second cooldown. Get to and from. If you're on an objective-based map, it's generally best to push the opposite lane and get value there. A lot of teams will try and stall and allow you to do as much push as you can, and you'll be fine if you do that. But you have to be very aware of your minimap. If you've uninstalled it, make sure to reinstall the minimap. And this is the #1 way. You can be absolutely terrible at Abathur, but you can go spam it in quick match. And I guarantee you that if you struggle so much with your minimap that you've uninstalled it, by playing Abathur for 6 hours and trying not to die while simultaneously doing all the things that I mentioned and more, you will now go into your other games very aware of your minimap. So if you ever wanted to learn the minimap and learn how to pay attention to the minimap, play Abathur. This is the #1 way to learn how to look at your minimap. You're welcome.